All right, welcome everybody to our Whiteboard Wednesday episode here at the Call Sheet Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Smith. Last week on Whiteboard Wednesday, we had on Kevin Stefanski, head coach of the Cleveland Browns. Fantastic conversation on everything that goes into an NFL offseason in order to get ready for training camp and the regular season. Fantastic peek behind the curtain at what reality entails for an NFL head coach. It's a year-round job. It's a demanding job. And Coach Stefanski was incredibly eloquent in explaining it and very generous with his time and his thoughts. Today on Whiteboard Wednesday, another fascinating topic as we dive into the Brian Flores Blitz system. Brian Flores is one of the most creative defensive coordinators in the NFL. And he has a blitz system that is very unique. It's beginning to gain more and more traction, gain a little bit more popularity amongst defensive coordinators. But nobody does it quite like Flores does. And so let's take a deep dive on Brian Flores, his fire zones, his mug looks, his simulated pressures, the things that he's doing in Minnesota that he once did in Miami that are really causing problems for opposing offenses. So to begin, the blitz is not new. The blitz has been with us as a concept in the NFL for a long time. It really started to gain popularity in the 1960s and 1970s as opposing offenses began to throw the football more. The mode of passing the ball in that era, the favored mode, was the deep ball. You saw quarterbacks under center. They'd take a 7-step drop. They'd hitch up, and then they'd launch some 9 route, some 7-8-9, some vertical route deep down the field to a wide receiver. They were long developing routes. And because there were virtually no rules on what you could not do to a quarterback at that time, defenses were incentivized to rush the passer and to make a quarterback pay for taking that deep drop and throwing that long developing route. Teams started to blitz, and the toll it took on quarterbacks was significant. The first great offensive counter move to that came in the 1980s when the West Coast offense was introduced by Sam Wyche, Bill Walsh, that coaching tree out of Cincinnati into San Francisco. And that reduced the effectiveness of a lot of those blitzes of the day because of the quick pass and the use of the running back as a hot receiver. Basically, in the West Coast offense, you had a ton of timing routes. And if you wanted to blitz a quarterback, he was going to get the ball out quickly, on time. And oftentimes that meant swinging it to a back in space where he had the opportunity to operate one-on-one against a linebacker. Running backs would win a lot of those. And little 2-yard swing passes would turn into 12 and 13-yard gains. Or you'd have these quick timing routes that were difficult to disrupt in man coverage. The slants, the quick flat routes, the crossers, etc. So it took a while for the league to figure out how to counter this. But in 1988, it's amazing how much innovation has come out of Cincinnati. I'm going to do a show on that at some point. Cincinnati, a fairly innocuous franchise in the history of the league, has created some of the most interesting innovation in football history. And again, we'll get to that in a future show. But one of the innovations came from Dick LeBeau, who was the defensive coordinator for Sam Wyche and the Bengals in the mid-'80s, led them to a Super Bowl run after the 1988 season. They almost knocked off the 49ers in that 1989 Super Bowl. And, Dick LeBeau had a really talented safety named David Fulcher, who was as big as a linebacker but as fast as a safety. And he was looking for multiple ways to use David Fulcher. And teams had blitzed safeties before, but they'd never blitzed safeties while combining that with zone coverage that featured players lined up at the line of scrimmage as though they would rush the passer, now falling back into coverage. And he began to experiment with that. David Fulcher would come from distance. He would blitz from the second level. And a quarterback would think, oh, well, he's voiding the hook curl zone, right? Or he's voiding the middle third underneath. And I can just dump a little spot route to a tight end. But little did he know that 300-pound nose tackle Tim Crumry was now dropping off into coverage. And you'd throw that ball right at the helmet of a nose tackle who unexpectedly was dropping into an underneath zone. And Dick LeBeau wreaked havoc upon the NFL with the fire zone, in particular when he got to Pittsburgh in the early 90s, and they had unbelievable pass rushers like Greg Lloyd and Kevin Green and talented safeties like Carnell Lake. And the Blitzburg era was born there, and the fire zone became all the rage. But the fire zones eventually became less common as the NFL offenses evolved. Again, they went to the spread, right? And now 12 personnel or 21 personnel was out. 11 personnel was all the rage. And now the field was being spread from sideline to sideline. And now those zones that you were asking defensive linemen to drop into or edge rushers walked up to drop into were a lot bigger. There was just more room on the field with the way that passing games were being scripted so that they were as horizontal as they were vertical. And in talking with Coach Stefanski last week, well, I brought up the blitz, and his attitude was, bring it. Blitz us. Go ahead. Because NFL coordinators and offensive coaches today feel as though when you blitz, you jeopardize yourself in coverage because you have one less defender in coverage, and they trust in the ability of quarterbacks to recognize the blitz and know where to go with the football in order to exploit it. However, there are still some blitz-heavy teams out there that get great results from their packages. Probably prominent amongst them are the Minnesota Vikings. Last year, 2024, the Vikings were fourth in the NFL in sacks. They tied for first in the NFL in takeaways. And I think one of the most telling statistics about what Minnesota was able to do with their blitz is they were amongst the league leaders in pre-snap penalties by opposing offenses, namely false starts. And we'll get to why that's important in a minute. Brian Flores, their defensive coordinator, what is he doing with his pressures that is allowing him to be effective when many defenses around the league are shying away from the blitz because of how well offenses now pick it up and execute against it? It starts with what some people call stacked pressures. The 70 formation, the 70 when you talk about defensive fronts, there's the 3-4 and there's the 4-3, and teams get into the 2-4-5 nickel. But Flores is one of the few defensive coordinators who will show you a 70 look. 7 guys at the line of scrimmage, nobody at the linebacker level. The challenge for an offense when faced with that look is to decide the following. All right, who's actually coming? If 7 guys are coming, an offense will probably feel as though the quarterback can catch the snap and, throw a slant route or throw something into the middle of the field. My gosh, there's nobody there. But 7 guys are almost never coming. Occasionally, Flores will bring 6 out of this look. He really likes to bring 5. If he brings 5, the challenge that a quarterback faces and that an offensive coordinator faces is to decipher, well, which 5 are coming and who's dropping back. And if they're dropping back, into what areas specifically are they dropping? If you're going to void a zone, well, which one are you voiding? It's kind of like a shell game. You got to find the little ball underneath the shells. Well, in this instance, find the voided zone. And that is incredibly challenging. The threat of all of these guys coming, all these defenders coming, and when an offense doesn't know which gaps are going to actually be attacked by a rusher and which ones will be left free as that individual who's walked up at the line of scrimmage drops off into coverage, forces these offenses into slide protections. They're going to full slide right or full slide left. And when you full slide as an offense, you're making sure that you just have every gap covered. Everybody's going to slide to the gap to their right or left. And we're going to make sure they're all covered. But if you're in an empty set and you only got 5 guys who can slide, and Flores brings 6, or Flores brings 5, but one of those guys is off of the edge from which you're sliding away. Everybody slides right, but now he brings somebody off the offense's left edge. That guy's a free runner. He's getting a free run at your quarterback. And yes, the rules have changed to protect quarterbacks, but still, there aren't a lot of offense coordinators who are comfortable with a free runner coming at their quarterback. The other thing is this. These looks create tremendous anxiety for an offense because they force the offense to communicate quickly at the line of scrimmage. You don't know that this stun is coming ahead of time. You get in the huddle, you call a play, you get up to the line of scrimmage. Suddenly Flores jumps into some kind of 70 mug look. And as an offensive line, as a quarterback, the communication process begins immediately. You have to change your protection. Maybe you have to identify your hot routes. The play clock is ticking. There's an urgency to get this done. Therefore, offenses oftentimes get a little panicky. All that communication goes on. The quarterback's rushing. Oh man, what the hell is the snap count? Bang, you get a false start penalty. It's not coincidental that the Vikings were among the league leaders in creating false start penalties from their opponents. So yeah, they create sacks, 4th in the league last year. They create turnovers, tied for 1st. But they are the result of the anxiety that's often created by the looks that Flores presents. Now, here's an interesting thing about these looks. In 2023, the Vikings led the NFL in blitz percentage. They blitzed on 51% of their snaps. They were the only team in the league to blitz on more than half of their snaps. In 2024, that dropped by over 11%. They were down to about 38% of a blitz rate. They preferred to go with 4-man pressures. But they created relatively the same number of sacks, and they actually created more turnovers by blitzing less. All right, so what are they doing in 2024 that was different from 2023? Well, in 2023, they were showing 7 and oftentimes bringing 5, and that qualifies as a blitz. A blitz, by definition, is any time that there are 5 rushers or more. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are bringing guys from the second level or that a linebacker has to be involved. It's a 5-man or more pressure. So the Vikings were bringing 5 or more on over half their snaps in 2023. Well, last year, they preferred to bring 4. And this is what we call simulated pressure. So Flores went from stacked pressures where he was going to bring 5 to simulated pressures where he was going to show a full blitz. And now he was going to drop 3 guys off that line. And so the blitz rate fell, but the success of simulating the blitz was still there. Why? Because what you're doing when you show that blitz is you reduce an offense's play menu. They go to their hot checks at the line. You force them into really short and simple throws. And now you are bringing guys from various levels into different zones that a quarterback might not be anticipating. And sometimes where he thinks he's got an open window, he really doesn't, because there's a rotation going in coordination with the coverage change that puts a defender right into the area where he's throwing the football. If an offense can diagnose these simulated pressures, because there is so much rotation and movement in the defense, it can hit some big plays. One of Flores' favorite pressures is to take a safety who's lined up like a deep third defender, a cover 3 deep third defender, and to drop him down to the second level into like a robber or a rat role. And oftentimes they'll now take the corners who look like they're playing deep outside third, and they'll sprint them towards the hashes because they're actually deep half players. And if you can diagnose that, that's a lot of rotation and a lot of movement, then you can get some deep shots off. You know, you can run some post wheel, right? Or some switch verticals, right? Or because they're not running a Tampa 2 scheme, you might be able to get a quick slot receiver over top of that drop down safety, split those corners, bang, hit the hole shot up the middle of the field. But because Minnesota's alignments are so unconventional, because Flores basically rejects the typical 3-level structure, which means you usually have defensive linemen at the first level doing first level things, playing the run, rushing the passer, linebackers at the second level, and D-backs at the third level. Those defenses are fairly simple to be able to diagnose coverage and to understand post-snap where a defender's going to be. He rejects that. What Flores is just as likely to take a third level defender and rush the passer with him, or to take a first level defender and drop him to the second level as he is to play a traditional structure. So how do you know? How do you know? He gets one of two things. He gets you to get the ball out quickly with the hopes that you're going to throw to a hot receiver or a check that the Vikings are anticipating and rolling into, or he confuses you and he gets you to hold the ball, in which instance you take a shot or you get sacked. Last thing that Flores is really good at doing. He's also very unpredictable as to when he's going to blitz. The Vikings blitzed on first down last year at a higher rate than almost any team in the league. And what they're trying to do there, of course, is to get you into a uncomfortable second down. If the blitz can create confusion, get a false start, you blow an assignment, maybe it's a run play and you blow a blocking assignment and they tackle you for a 2-yard loss, maybe it's a sack. Second and long is one of the worst downs in the NFL because play callers in the NFL are overwhelmingly predictable on second and long. What does it say in the offensive play caller manual for second and long? It's like the Bible of play calling. It says, if you're in second and long, get back half the yardage you need to make a first down. So if it's second and 12, gain 6 yards. Well, play calling in an attempt to gain 6 yards is fairly predictable. Quick throws, short underneath routes, screens, draw plays. That's the kind of stuff you can now anticipate as a defensive play caller. If you feel like you know what the offense is going to run as a defensive play caller, you're in a great situation. So Flores blitzes a ton on first down when offenses aren't necessarily expecting the blitz, and he gets great results because of it. All right, how do you beat it? Because there are teams that have had success against Flores and his system. In particular, last season, the Detroit Lions, and in the playoffs, the LA Rams. Both of those offenses had success against Brian Flores' defense, and they both subscribed to a similar philosophy, and it was the following. Your quarterback needs to know that he's going to get hit, and he has to stand in there against the pressure and take hits. Both Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford, big guys. These are not small quarterbacks, big dudes. Stood in the pocket in the face of the rush, delivered the football into voided zones, or delivered the football to receivers who could beat man coverage, took shots, got knocked on their butts a lot, got back up, and found success. That's really it, man. I mean, if you can get your quarterback to remain calm in the face of the chaos that Flores presents, then you can catch Minnesota out of position as those defenders are rotating all over the field, and you could probably hit big plays. But you can't cheat that. Your quarterback's got to know that going in. And if you don't have a QB who you think can do that, you got problems. So, as we head to the season, one of the most interesting defenses to watch will be the Minnesota Vikings. They brought real pressure in 2023 under Brian Flores to great success on defense. They brought simulated pressure in 2024 to great success. What will they do this year? To talk about all that, my guest tomorrow on our State of the Franchise show will be David Stefano, frequent guest here at the Call Sheet Daily, one of our great contributors here at Fans First, from the First and Skol Network, biggest Vikings fan I know. and David will talk to us about that Vikings team. He's always a great guest. Don't miss that show. Until then, hope everybody has a great day, and we will catch you tomorrow. Take care.